What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Historican podcast. We have a special episode for you today, and in light of Puerto Rican Heritage Month that's upon us. My name is Joseph Vasquez. We have an amazing show. As you see this book next to me, The Road of the 78 Prayers, we have the authors who put this together. I'm going to share their background real quick. First, we have Laraine Batís-Gelpi, born in East Harlem, grew up exclusively in the Bronx, with a master's in educational psychology and a master's in counseling services. She has worked over 30 years as an educator and guidance counselor in her community. As part of the Puerto Rican diaspora, she views cultural identity as essential to spiritual growth and personal evolution. Her husband, Dr. Miguel David Gelpi, born in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico, within a few months being born, his family moved to the Bronx, where he would be raised. He holds a PhD in religious studies and has taught at Fordham Preparatory School for more than 30 years. A lifelong photographer, his work continues to evolve since his early days in high school and college. Together, they've been married for 34 years, God bless. Their shared project grew into a 22-day journey across Puerto Rico, documenting all 78 towns and reconnecting with their roots. Their book, The Road of the 78 Prayers, reflects their commitment to family legacy, storytelling, and cultural preservation. They are both now retired and doing many other wonderful things. And real quick, as I can get into this book real quick. So a 22-day photo journey documenting 78 town centers, Placitas of Puerto Rico, began as a gift for their children and grandchildren, evolved into a published collection for the diaspora, blends photography, memory, ancestral reconnection, and travel narrative. Each town is spotlighted with photos, checklists, and space for readers to record family history. Please welcome Dr. David and Laraine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
All right, so how did growing up in the Bronx shape your connection to Puerto Rico?
I would say that I never saw it as a direct connection to Puerto Rico. It just was what it was. All of our family, for me, all of my family, Puerto Rican, all of our friends were Puerto Rican. The neighborhood was Puerto Rican. We grew up in the Soundview section of the Bronx. And so it never felt like, oh, this was the connection. It just what was. It's what we were in. It was part of, life every day. I don't think until I left the Bronx to go to high school, a different section of the Bronx, that I kind of realized, oh, well, this is not everywhere. This is not part of everyone's experience. And so that I think was the first time I became aware of how much of we were surrounded by that when it wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, and everyone spoke Spanish. I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to this a little bit later, but we're not fluent in Spanish. But everybody spoke Spanish around us, everyone that was older, you went to the bodega, you got stuff, and, everybody ran a tab, and everybody, drank cola champagne, the champagne, and, everyone drank ponches. So it was part of the thing. But it wasn't like a conscious thing about Puerto Rico and going to Puerto Rico. We went every so often. It wasn't as regular as now since we've been married, but it was just part of the ethos. It was just part of, the DNA, part of our makeup.
Right. And I thought, I was just going to say, not only was that where we were living, but when we went to visit our grandparents, my grandmother was on 116th Street between Park and Lexington. So when we got there was that. And my father grew up in Prospect Avenue. So we went there was that. You were always in these sections where that was the thing.
I have to react to that address. My grandparents grew up so across the street, Jefferson and Wagner. Wow.
Yeah.
We must have walked right across
I'm sure.
100 times at La Bodega or at a festival or somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I just had to share that.
Absolutely.
But this is before we even get into it, this is exactly the point of the book, how the oral traditions and the storytelling really leads us to the connection. So, yeah.
And for both of you individually, what sparked this desire to want to have this connection? Did you feel a disconnect or was you just trying to grow deeper into your identity as Puerto Ricans, or how would you describe it?
Well, I think that the genesis of this was, right after we went back to Puerto Rico right after Hurricane Maria. And, we kind of saw some of what that was like. And we started thinking like, well, like what's going to happen? Are we going to be the last generation of Puerto Ricans? Will there be an influx of other people who will kind of take the place of? And even before Bad Bunny started, speaking about Puerto Rico as kind of like Hawaii, I started thinking about that. What's this going to be like? Will we be like Hawaii? And so we began thinking about Puerto Rico beyond the metropolitan area, which is where my family is from. And we would always, like everybody else, you go to Viejo San Juan, and you go to Luquillo Beach, you go to Fajardo, maybe you take the ride down to Ponce, and then you shoot back up to Cabo Rojo maybe, and then Aguadilla, and then you're back in Old San Juan, and so we were doing that, but we thought, well, what's happening outside of the metropolitan area, beyond Santurce, what's happening out there? And so we just thought, well, let's go everywhere. Let's see the island. I mean, how big is it? It's a big little island. It's a lot. And so I think that was pretty much the genesis of that. It's like, we're losing something here. And before it's all lost, whatever it is, we need to see it. And we need to make sure that our kids are aware of what this island is, and the rich legacy and history and the traditions that we celebrate, like where they come from. When we do a paranda here in our home, like how does that connect to our families, but how does that connect to Puerto Rico, to the island, to those traditions?
I think for myself, even in terms of wanting to know more, I started to have questions about, well, why didn't my own mom speak more about her experience? And then you begin to understand the reasons why or how people came, and people had different trajectories when they left the island. And so, my mom's trajectory was different. And so there wasn't this big push to constantly go back. And it wasn't until we started going more frequently that I'm like, well, why didn't she go back? So then you start asking these other questions, which lead you to this understanding of, well, there were some groups of people that, in the early 40s when they came, it was kind of like, all right, we got to do this here. Her dad passed away of tuberculosis when she was very young, and there were 3 other kids. So my grandmother stayed on for another couple of years. And then her dad, my great grandfather, my grandmother, and the 4 kids came with, also her sister. And they all came and they landed on 116th Street. But there was and then it was assimilate. It was assimilate, because you got to survive, especially if there's no man of the house. That was another layer to that. He had passed. And so I think there was a little bit of a disconnect there, just in terms of survival and living life. And well, this is what life is. So there wasn't a lot of that going back, although my grandmother only spoke Spanish, and, we responded to her in English. So there was that, that exchange that's not so unusual for people. So I had my questions, I think, as I got older about, well, why? I hear a lot of other people go back and visit family. My mother really didn't do that so much. So that was part of it too, like to investigate. And then you start finding out things about your family, which is always interesting.
I wanted to, a common theme that seems to keep coming up with a lot of people that we've been interviewing is, comes out of Hurricane Maria and what happened there. It was a lot of loss, so much heartbreak, lives were lost. But it seems that something was sparked in people, especially in the diaspora, to want to have this connection back to the island, to want to invest in the island, to want to, do more for the island. So I appreciate that, when you guys just were sharing about that, what happened in Hurricane Maria. And then you kind of felt like, almost a danger of losing your identity, right? That kind of can maybe possibly spark this whole idea. So I kind of wanted to get into that too. So what inspired the decision to turn this simple idea, imagine if we, into a full pilgrimage?
Well, I think because before Hurricane Maria, there were two earthquakes, right?
Right.
And then there was COVID. And I think COVID for everybody, not just Puerto Rico, it just kind of ripped the veil and it just exposed these systems, not just in Puerto Rico, but specifically for us in Puerto Rico, these systems of colonialism, these systems of oppression. My mother grew up in a political home in Puerto Rico. And so I grew up around, from my mother, this idea of an independent Puerto Rico. So that's always been something that's kind of percolated in my own mind. This notion of a free Puerto Rico for free Puerto Ricans, and that's always been a thing for me. And I know it's more nuanced than just a slogan, but I think for us, we realized that, damn, nobody really cares in terms of the U.S. federal government,
The response.
and the response for from or to Hurricane Maria and all this stuff, and then COVID, and we just like, damn, this really is a colonial system, and there is very little attempt to cover that or to hide that, and then some of the recent things about the English as the official language, and in that movement in the United States, and I think we just thought that, and Laraine brought this up. She was like, well, are we going to be the last? She would look at me, are you going to be one of the last like Puerto Ricans who was born there? And then, people from the mainland, from wherever, from Europe, from the mainland are just going to, bogart the island and just take over. And now, because they're Puerto Ricans, technically, anyone who's in Puerto Rico is Puerto Rican, but culturally, it's just a concern that we've had. So I think that we started thinking, what will this legacy be, not just for our family, for our kids, but so many people who, for so many reasons, haven't been back to Puerto Rico.
Been able to go. Yeah.
They don't go, they can't go, they haven't gone, and when they do go back, if they ever have an opportunity to go back, in search of their families, what's going to be there? What will be left for them?
And that's not to say that the island should not progress within what serves the people of the island. But I think the idea was, as we've traveled around, the beauty of the island, the simplicity of some of the towns, when and you don't mistake simplicity for having less or being less, but it's a beautiful simplicity that exists. It's taking the day a little slower. It's not, having this New York rush sometimes that we have. And I just kept thinking, my kids would travel to Puerto Rico on their own. But again, not seeing those other places. And then, we were expecting a grandchild, and the thought that, I would like for them to have a view of what this island was like in its long span. There was 78, municipalities, 78 pueblos. Like, what was that like when you go from town to town? And I think that's kind of what sparked. So it was just like more about saying, imagine if we went to all 78 towns. And then we thought, well, we could do like 5 in a day. So it kind of evolved like that. And then got out a pen and a paper and a map, and we were like, all right, you could do this, and we kind of mapped it out like that. And then it became very real, like, oh, we can do this. But it turned very academic.
Yeah.
It was very academic until we started. And then when we started, it just became something else entirely. As you start driving through the countryside and just in the quiet, we were together in the car a lot.
It was just us. There was just one portion, because Laraine divided. If you came here, and if we had thought about it, we could show you the paper map. Laraine bought 2 maps, put them together, and these are like paper, and she would have it open, and she would plot out. So these towns are close to each other. So you'll see in the book that it's kind of looped. There's suggestions on how best to do that.
Right.
And so it was just us. There was just one portion where there were other friends with us, but it was us. We would stop and we'd we were in Piñones, or we'd go to,
Talk to people.
we talk to people,
Right.
we were eating, alcapurrias in the car. But, at the end of it, we're still friends.
Right.
We're still married. We didn't beat each other up. We were going up these mountain roads, and I'm like, well, where the hell is this? And it was a dead end. And then it's like, we got to back down.
Right, so that was one of the things that I mentioned in the book. That reason we use a roadmap was because, first of all, I think I enjoy the challenge, but also you may not have access to GPS. You should know how to read a map. Like if you're going to some of these places where you are likely to lose, and we did. We lost signal all the time. So doing that trip, those towns really did become an adventure. There was one time, like we drove a little too far onto the beach. We got stuck. We were like, what do you do? Thank God. So this was kind of like things that happened. These two guys came along with a banana leaf, which I was like, genius. And, they helped us. They got the car out of the sand, and people were just great like that.
To these New Yorkers,
Right.
with our broken Spanish. So they understood that, you know what, we're all the same, and, they don't live here, but they're all people. And so, we're going to help them out. And, we would talk to cops, they would let us take pictures. So it all just kind of came together like, can we do this?
Right. And then as we were doing it,
we can. And holy crap,
became
we're doing this.
Right. There were a lot of like moments, I think, that were kind of like, look at this. Like, look at this. Like, I want my kids to see this. And that's kind of, and even as we were doing it, it wasn't a book. It was just like, this was going to be like a Staples. You can go into Staples and, put all the pictures together and let them have it. But it was, when people asked, so it was 22 days over 3 trips, because we were still working full time. It was 2 shorter trips and then 1 longer trip. But people were like, why are you going back again? Like, what's the, so then as we began sharing what we were doing, people were like, oh, I'd like to see what that looks like when it's done. I was like, oh yeah, we'll show it to you before we give it to the kids. And then it just kind of took on a life of its own, as we got towards some of the end things. And, it was extremely moving. It was extremely moving to be in the spaces, to be with a sense of humility, because I'm a visitor. Although I'm feeling like I want to call this home, there's this trepidation about, I can't just usurp that. These people have, our counterparts have lived through all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So treading lightly with respect, but wanting to share. And I think, a big hump that El Conejo got over was this invitation to, come on, and feeling like, how can I help while preserving dignity for the people that are there, but allowing me to be part of that exchange. So I think permission is felt at this point. Like we feel like we have had permission to do this. So we have always felt like the book is going to land where it's supposed to land. And we've kind of kept that. So I think that's been true. I think that's been true for the book.
Wow. So these are the things that make us, at the end of these podcasts, just in tears with the beautiful things that happen. Trusting us with your story, and it started with trusting to tell stories. In your story, I find such a beautiful connection. I can't wait. So I have my middle child. He's a first year of at GC at community college, and he's taking, after his first semester, he's going to Puerto Rico to do much of what I wish I could have done. This exploration to tell stories. Please know that one of the several guidebooks he has is yours now.
Oh,
it is your book. It is that pilgrimage. He will go and checklist the cities and the places he visits, and now have a roadmap. Something I wish I could give him from my soul. You've given this universe, and I just want to be in humble thank for that.
That makes me very emotional, because I feel like the point of the book was to encourage people to get a story, share a story, tell a story. And the bits and pieces, like sometimes we'll get something from a person who'll say, oh, and that really makes me happy, because it makes me feel like this person has gone on to share a story, even if they're just staring at a picture. So now the hope is that your son's going to look at a picture and say, when I get there, this is what I'm going to see,
And there's another layer.
Yeah.
You've given a father who claims Boricua, who does not have a roadmap to that island and only knows it in the same way you have it described from visiting and the hot spots and the places you go and the San Juan Hotel and the casinos and the Luquillo. And now I could not give him the layer that's beyond just what that child holds in his hands is the journey that I could not give him. So you've given me a truth that I wanted to own in a way that I couldn't without a story.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And pilgrimage, it evokes, this the spiritual, this deeper thing.
Right.
So it's not the end, it's getting there. So driving from one place to the other, we would see, and then, our last trip, we would stop, at these sugar refineries. And it's just the two of us. And we, we could almost see people and we could hear. And
What
it's
that
so
sounds
silent.
like.
And it was like, I can just imagine thousands of men coming through here. Like, who came through here? So we hope that these are opportunities as people going from one place to the next, using this guide or using the stories and the images as ways to connect with their family members. But it also gives them the opportunity to see where other people have been, where people have left, part of their spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they can connect to that. So we're hoping that people, can do that. And they don't need our book to do that. But we're hoping that this will engender. When we were in Puerto Rico the last time, I posted a few pictures on Instagram and I kept saying, I'm glad you all came to see Bad Bunny, but there's a lot more besides, and I'm sure he would say that too. And that's not to disparage him, but it's like, you got to get out, so you're here to see him, but where's Abuelita from?
Right.
And wherever she's from, go there, have a drink there, go, eat, have some rice and beans, eat a mofongo wherever she's from. But you got to be there. So that's kind of what we were thinking. And
Right. And it doesn't consume. I mean, it has led to this thought, which we've had for a while, wanting to own something there to pass on to our children so that, that's not happened yet, but so that our children have a home, in their ancestral home. My mother was born there. We're just once removed, but yet so much of our life is here now. But so much of who we are, so much of who I am, so much of who actually my children are, is because of that resilience of the eon, the couple hundred years that came before us just being here. So it's a lot. I know people move in the world differently, but to stand in a space where, and in the book I refer to it as your kin, your people, your ancestors stood and lived and worked and had families. That's some deep shit. I feel like that's very connecting. And I say also, I feel like that filled spaces. We were there. So my son, our extended family is Caribbean, Puerto Rican as well. My daughter's husband is Jamaican, and my son's wife is Puerto Rican. The family's Puerto Rican. My son and his wife decided to get married in Old San Juan, which was lovely. We renewed one of the things we did on our 22 days was we renewed our vows in the cathedral in Old San Juan, which was lovely. But I think my daughter-in-law, my son thought, that's going to be so hard. I'm like, no, literally, I just emailed the church and they said, what's the date? And that's it. That's all you do. You email the church, and if the cathedral is available, or at the top, I can't remember the name.
the chapel, San Jose.
San Jose, that overlooks the cemetery. They emailed, they got the date. And so this is how we had this beautiful family wedding. It was an immediate family. We went, they celebrated their nuptials there. During that time, everyone's mother went. So my mother, who had not been there, my mother had not been back to her town in 73 years. She had been back to the island, maybe a couple of times, a handful of times, but never back to her town. So 73 years later, my mother stood in the center of Mayagüez with her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren. And I feel as though she wasn't expecting to feel that it would be a homecoming, but it just made me feel good. As we were walking, she was like, I feel like I remember. And I was like, you spent not many, but your early years here. And to anybody who's interested in those things, whether it's your son, we find that there's a lot of information available to find those things. A birth certificate, a death certificate. My grandfather's, the way we found it for my mom was that my grandfather's death certificate, you died in your house at that time. So if you look at the death certificate, you could see the address. So that's where he died. And so the house was gone and the street, the numbers are changed around a little bit. But yeah, I was able to be back there with her and it was just, it meant a lot to me. My mom's 80, she's probably going to kill me when she sees this. My mom is 85. But to be able to do that meant a lot to me, And to have this history now that my children have started another layer of history there for themselves, which they now, that's, their responsibility. Will you go back? Will you visit? Will you make sure, that you stay connected?
And it builds, it makes more personal what Angel Hernandez, the Bronx historian on your most previous show, talking about the different patterns of migration and how Puerto Ricans have been here, since the 20s and the teens. And that's very, very general. But what is the end, like the personal end stories of that migration? I mean, you can go down to Hunter College and you can see some of those stories, but this is personal. This is like your family and, our families. So we can, we'd like to give people the opportunity to kind of, flush that out. It's like, yeah, all right. So there were these patterns and, Abuelita was here from 1930, let's say. But where does her story start? Like where does our own family migration, how does that kind of connect, to Hunt's Point or to 116?
Right.
Or, wherever it was that they landed.
I was fortunate enough to be able to just a quick looking through things. I ended up finding that, the stories are incredible and the island is not that big. My great grandfather, who I did meet, he passed when I was about 7, I believe. He lived in Lares in a neighborhood called Mirasol. And I said, oh yeah, I found that him and my grandmother, my great grandmother. So there we're closest to Hacienda Lealtad, which is a coffee farm. And in the census, he's listed as a laborer, a day laborer. So the closest coffee farm. So he picked coffee at Hacienda Lealtad. That we know. So I was able to visit. Hacienda Lealtad still exists. So it's not a working farm. Somebody bought it. I believe a family member purchased it. And I was able to, I wasn't picking coffee, but there were coffee beans there. And I was able to pick coffee for myself. And I just thought over 100 years ago, my great grandfather, this man that I did meet, but there are so many things we don't know about them, about their lives. When you learn about them and you realize how much of that is reflected in who you are now, that's where a lot of the power lies. And so the wish for your son would be that he finds those pieces of himself back there when he goes, to take the time to look slowly.
I can't wait to hear him tell similar stories to what you did. Anyway, you've given me the context. Joseph is going to follow up with you on a question, but I can't wait to, I'm going to delve in on some of the places you may have visited. Joseph, did you want to ask?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that you both had said. First, I wanted to say how it seems to just be a beautiful intentionality with this project and everything that you did. Because I remember even when you sent me the book and I told you, you guys asked me, oh, where's your father from? And you put a note in there, para tu papá. And that made me so emotional because he just passed last year. Something I wanted to say, because you were both reflecting on, the people who have passed those roads before you guys, or even your kin. I think it was, I don't know if it was you, Laraine, who spoke about, because I wanted to get into it. You shared a lot of deeply moving moments, but something you had wrote, I guess, about your grandfather. in Adjuntas, and you found his grave. And I thought that was so, my great grandfather's from Adjuntas, so he was born there. So that's awesome. I was like, oh, wow, that really jumped out to me. But what would talk about that experience, what it was like finding his grave and just, your thoughts and all that in that time.
I think that being less in the cemetery, but more in the center of town, when we got to Adjuntas, I just found myself, because of the Placita and Adjuntas is kind of, it's closed in. Other places are very spread out. So it's a nice size, but definitely closed in, surrounded by stores, and then beyond that, mountains. I just recall sitting there thinking like that my grandfather had walked in this placita, because it wasn't the same. Some placitas change location, but it had not. So he had walked in this space. He was a man who always kind of wore a suit, not really sure what he did. But it just moved me, because I thought it felt almost like a ghost. It felt almost like a ghost as I was sitting there, that I could feel his presence, and I felt like I belonged there. I didn't know how to explain it. Like I was very close to my dad, and this is my father's father. I just felt like I belonged there, and I felt that he was glad that we were there. That's the only way that I could describe it. It was very emotional. It just felt like we were sitting in the right space. I didn't feel a need to get up and walk around. I didn't feel a need to move, just to be there. And yeah, because my father at the time wasn't well, so that was it was very emotional for me. It just felt like filling a space in me. Filling a space in me that was important to fill. It's like, oh, you have questions. This is part of an answer. I'm not sure what the question was, but this is part of an answer for you, and to take that with you. Seeing his name on a gravestone is like wild. Then you see the spelling. It's Batiz, not Batis. So things get changed when you kind of make your way back and forth. But yeah, just like being with my mom, it was an emotional space to be in. Just feeling like, you had so much family, and we did. Like my grandfather had a big family, and that's where they lived. They weren't anywhere else. So yeah, it's overwhelming. And then when you look back on it, it's kind of like, it felt good. It feels good to fill in some of the gaps. Because while we are, we're here, we're New Yorkers, born and raised in the mainland, there is such a large part of ourselves that still exist or lived there for so long, that not really feeling like you don't want to neglect that.
So beautiful, so beautiful. I can't wait to Jessica. Jessica has a line in one of her poems, one of our partners, that really invites the New Yorkers to the homeland as home. And these experiences and these conversations really do bring us all back home to a common place. I want to appreciate that. One of the places we noticed, where visit a lot of placitas. That was a central theme. So we want to talk about why did that become a focus, and why do you think that is sort of? I mean, how many plaquitas do I have on a wall that have a little scene about? Like, why did you think that became part of our identity?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'll let Laraine explain it, but I spend a lot of time with a lot of Irish folks. And even when we were growing up, it was always, like, what parish did you go to? And then it was like, well, what high school? So that's, I spent a lot of time teaching in high school. So it was always, well, the high school was like a reference point, like the parishes, and then for the Catholics, the Catholic Church was a reference point. And so for a lot of Irish folks, is, well, what county are you from? And so we had to figure out, well, where do we go? When we're going to go around to the different places, where are we going to go? There has to be a central place in each of these towns, in each of the little, the municipalities. Right. So it was this, I think Laraine decided, well, we have to go to the center of town. And I don't know if.
I just feel like, I think as we were thinking, all right, what are you going to do? Like, we're going to meander through everything? Like, no, we got to if you're going to see all of them. So what would connect them? We thought, what's the commonality? Because the town
has to be consistency.
Right. Each of the towns was very different. Some were like a speck on the map, and you drive through and you're like, was that it? And you go back and yes, that was it. And others were like, in Caguas was huge. I mean, Mayagüez was huge. Ponce is huge. But they're not all like that. And so the thought was, what's the commonality? Every single town has a placita. And okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the center of every town, the placita of every town. And so a few things happened. Like our first thought was, I was like, well, I don't want people to think there's like a church book, because we do know that the placitas are remnants. It's remnants of colonial rule. So we didn't kind of like want to highlight that. But the fact that the placita remained as the center of town, yes, it's anchored by a church and
at City Hall.
But through the process of assimilation, many of our ancestors used those church. Okay, it's a Catholic church, but I'm going to go in there and I'm praying to Santa Barbara. So, they were doing their own thing within the Catholic Church that was located there. And so we felt that was a good way, a commonality to travel from town to town, to use that as a point. Okay, once we get here, there's other things to see. And that was the other thing. A couple of people were like, oh, you didn't put, I was like, this is not a tourist book. This is not about what you need to see in every town, because the placita may not be the most beautiful thing in that town, but it is the center of town. And if you look back, even if people lived in El Campo, sometimes they would make their way to town to sell stuff, what they were farming. If you were not a farmer, you went there to buy what you needed. If you worshiped and you were going to church, that's where you went. Or, as my mother kind of recalled when we went, she was like, yeah, it's the walking around town on Sunday in your best.
Promenade.
Like, who couldn't hold hands and who couldn't, so it was a social center as well. So we figured, that's a safe bet to go with the placitas.
And they do predate U.S. involvement on the island. So it was how, as Laraine mentioned, it was how colonial Spain organized the island. And we found that there were so many influences of Europe in the organizing and the structuring and the architecture of a lot of the placitas. So that it was just a practical thing. This is a common history for a lot of people. And then that will be, again, the genesis of conversation for people. So they'll look at the picture and say, oh, this is where Abuelita got married, or where Abuelita was baptized, or where you were baptized, your father got married, or did his confirmation or whatever. So it was the place that we thought that was more likely to engender conversation than, the bar that used to be over there that closed.
And we did find out there were a couple of towns that we found out that the original placita changed location.
Yeah.
So we, on a map, I'm looking it up and we're looking and it says one thing, but there's like this other huge structure. So there were a few towns where we made sure that we tried to get the original placita in there.
It's like visual plena is the storytelling center of the whole story. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You've done a little bit of this already, but I want to ask you to reflect on a moment that you may not have anticipated to be as emotionally moving as it is obvious to go and get reconnected, right? And you show those, but I know you've been moved. Do you want to share a moment where you were emotionally connected or moved on this 22-day journey that you did not anticipate?
There were a lot of moving times. I was very surprised and moved by San Germán in general, and it's left quite an impression on me. And I think because it's small, but there was something deep about it. They had the old, the original church, on the steps there, which is now a museum. And then across the plaza, there's a newer church. I don't remember when that was constructed, but it was just so contained, and it could have been like a block in Old San Juan. But I was really, really surprised. And then that became, the jump off point, to the other parts of that part of Puerto Rico, the southern part. And I was impressed by that. That men and women went from the San Juan area. They went all the way down there on their own. And, you couldn't go back so easily. And started a whole new thing down there.
Right. We sort of learned how different towns developed and ended up growing as centers of,
Yeah.
the West Coast, the East Coast. So yes, very interesting.
We've because my family is from Viejo San Juan, we'd always spend a lot of time there. I think going into, and we would always, and I would always imagine, my grandfather, my great grandfather, my mother, in the streets of, of Old San Juan, and every time we go into to La Mayoca to get breakfast, I'd always imagine my grandfather there, and and he mentioned that he would be there, but it was when we went into the church of the Franciscan church, and we went into the crypt, and it was like, yeah, well, yeah. Why have we never been?
Capilla San Francisco, right in this, I think by Pedro Albizu Campo University.
Yeah.
So right there in that square, not I don't think a lot of people know. Like you literally can just go into the church. If you walk downstairs, there are crypts down there that they're open to the they're usually open to the public, and it's just it's this living history that you can just that people pass by. And I think, if you don't take the time to kind of figure out the little bits, and I'm sure people who are going to watch the podcast, oh, I know that. But I think for the general population, there are a lot of people that don't know. Like we didn't know that there were still existing jail cells behind like the Discover Puerto Rico Tourism Board.
My God.
If you just walk back behind there, they'll let you go in. You see the original jail cells where they held Pedro Albizu Campo there. You can walk in, and I'm sure again, people who see the podcast will say, yeah, but there's no charge. You can just really walk in. We were there. There was nobody there. So in the silence of this space in this jail cells,
the irony,
and then right behind the tourism board, it was just
the irony,
incredible.
Because that was a jail, as most of your
was a
viewers
jail.
would know. But then there were these solitary confinement cells, these two little cells. We don't know if
I thought
Pedro
that was the
Albizu
thing.
Campos
Yeah.
was in one of those, but he was certainly jailed there before he was taken by the Americans. And we were just, I think I took 2 or 3 pictures, but I was just like, this is pretty effed up. And the irony, it's like, this is like the tourism center where the freaking jail used to be. What the hell?
Wow.